In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off last time when we were talking about sessions. So if you're just jumping in here and you wanted to see this and you don't have anything loaded, go ahead and grab the City Manager Web session URL rewriting.war file, load that in and make sure to rename it to City Manager Web so that all the redirects would work as expected. If you already had that loaded, great. Let's go ahead and continue. This time, we're not actually going to run anything. We're just going to take a quick look at how we can configure the deployment descriptor, the web XML file, to do some things for our session management. So I've minimized everything in this file to make it easier to see. And here underneath our context parameters, we're simply going to add a few things. So what we're going to do is go ahead and hit the less than sign so we can see our different options and then hit S. And we're looking for session config. So we're actually going to use this to configure our sessions. Underneath session config, we're going to have three options. Once again, less than will bring these up: cookie config, session timeout, and tracking mode. So we're going to look at a couple of these here real quick and just talk about what we could do with them. So the first thing we want, and this needs to be on the top of the session config anyway, is set our session timeout. So here again, what we're talking about is how long will the session remain active. So if you've ever been on a website that logged you out after 20 minutes of inactivity, that's essentially what's going on here with our site. Say that someone wanted to log in and we were tracking that login in the session. We might say after 20 minutes of inactivity, we want them automatically logged out for security reasons. So we could go ahead and set that here, and this would of course be application-wide. Now there are ways to set the session timeout directly in our session object in code, but we're not going to worry about that. If you wanted to look into that, you could. You could set the timeout there as well. But this again is application-wide. So the next thing we're going to look at is going to be our cookie config. So this, of course, is when we're working with cookies, and this is just going to be a way to make things a little bit more secure on our website. Go ahead and hit the less than sign. We can see the different options: comment, domain, HTTP only, max age, name, path, and secure. So comment and domain, we could of course add comments and a domain for the cookie if we wanted to. Name is going to be JSessionID by default. We don't really have any reason to change that. And path would be, is there a specific path on the computer you want to save it on? So we're going to kind of ignore those for now. You can look into them in more detail if you need to for some reason. But what we want to look at are a couple of the more important ones. If we're working with SSL and we want to make sure that no matter what, our cookie is stored on the secure layer, that way all the transmission between web client and server is encrypted, even if we're coming from a non-HTTPS destination or source on our client, we can still guarantee that that cookie would be stored and transmitted secure by setting this to true. Now we don't have that set up right now in our application, so we aren't going to be able to run that, but you can see that we could set that up. HTTP only is a way that we can make sure that the application won't let anybody but an HTTP object or HTTP request essentially manage the sessions. So we don't want to have someone writing some kind of crazy JavaScript that somehow hijacks our sessions. We can set this HTTP only to true, and that will lock down our system. But what you see here is the HTTP only is showing red and saying invalid. When you see that, that just simply means let's go ahead and put that on top. We can see that that's more important, so it's going to go ahead and make sure that we configure that first. And then finally, the last thing we want to look at is maximum age. Now, of course, maximum age is just another way for us to set how long that cookie might actually be alive on the computer itself. So this is separate from the session timeout, but once again, if we wipe out the cookie, the session also gets wiped out. So it's just another way we can wipe out the cookie. Last time when we were looking at URL rewriting, we saw that there was a way that we could basically encode our URL automatically through the system. But what we saw as a result was the JSessionID was actually put right on the browser's URL path line. That might not be as secure as what we really want. We might actually want to guarantee that we don't do that in our application. So what we can do is take a look at tracking mode. Tracking mode allows us to define how we want to have our sessions stored. So we can actually lock it down to cookie only, lock it down to URL only, or even SSL only here you can see. So what we could do is just say cookie, and that would mean that we can only store our sessions in a cookie. And if we try to do that URL rewriting, it should thereby protect from having that information displayed on the URL. Most of the time, what we'll end up doing is only really worrying about the timeout and potentially some of this security stuff if we want to lock down our system a little more and make it a little more robust for security reasons.